Welcome everybody, it's Cat B here. I'm coming to you from the UK today with the lovely Anni Siliverdale. Anni's going to introduce herself and tell you all about herself in a moment. Andy's not with me today, Andy's travelling, so we're letting him do his business stuff, but he'll be back with us in a couple of weeks' time. Anni, welcome to the Inspired Connections podcast show. Tell everybody about yourself and why you're here.
Thank you, Kat. Hello everybody. I'm mum of Anthony in spirit and Lindsay on earth. And Anthony passed by suicide on August the 22nd, 2022. So anything to do with twos is Anthony's number. My background is in educational leadership and consultancy, but I'm also a counsellor and a coach, and latterly a spiritual coach. And I think I've probably spent my whole life preparing me for this time of Anthony's passing and how I could eventually manage to bring myself back to being okay as possible, and maybe be able to offer other people grief support in trauma and in the trauma of suicide in particular. So Anthony was a great, fun son. He was always up to mischief. He was a business leader. He was an entrepreneur, and he was really popular. He loved cars right from being tiny. He used to, before the days of seatbelts, stand on the little gear hump in the back and shout out, BMW Mart, Mercedes Mart, and all the names of the cars. And he carried that with him, and he's passed it on to Anthony, my grandson. So let me tell you a little bit about the day that he decided to leave. And it was a really strange day, Kat, because I got up as usual and I could hear Anthony pottering around because he lived with me, because eventually he was diagnosed with psychosis, bless him. So if I was going anywhere, I used to tell him the time I left, how long I'd be there, where I'd be, and what time I came back. That particular day I'd gone for lunch with a friend because Anthony it's been a tricky few days, and I really felt for my own well-being I needed to go out, which is strange because it was almost as if I was being pushed out. And I remember going down the drive in the morning to get in the car, and it felt like there was like a vortex around me, like this rubbery feeling that I couldn't go back into the house. I had to go forward, and I think I was really being guided away from home. And so I was late back from the lunch again. I don't know why we ordered a second coffee. And on the way home, I saw 2 funeral cortege, and I thought, hope I don't see a third. I also saw a man on a bridge on the motorway. It was pouring down, and I prayed for him as I went under. He was just looking, I don't know any more than that. And it was funny because I got home about 3:45, and as soon as I put my key in the lock, something told me that Anthony had gone, although at that time he hadn't passed. So I came into the house in my raincoat and ankle boots, and I went straight upstairs and I lay on the bed in my coat and shoes. And about 4:45, I texted him and said, "Where are you, sweetheart?" And then at 10 minutes to 5, it occurred to me to put "I love you, Mum," and 2 kisses. And then I lay on the bed, really not present to the earth, I suppose. I don't know where the heck I was. And I was waiting for the police somewhere in my psyche. And the doorbell went, and I remember hearing heavy breathing and realising it was mine. And I was hanging onto the wooden stair rail all the way down the stairs. And I saw the word police through the glass front door. And my brother had died in an RTA, in a car crash, when he was 26. And I thought, Aunt's been in a crash, not thinking, thinking he was in hospital or something. So I opened the door, and God bless the poor young policewoman. I don't think she'd been trained in delivering messages. She just blurted it out. And I remember hitting the deck and the smell of the varnish on the floor. And then I remember pushing myself back up and eventually ringing my daughter. And the trauma and the shock of Anthony, he jumped to the light from the highest bridge on the motorway into a field so he wouldn't impact anybody else, bless him. The thought of that, when my daughter came, she got me a drink of water. I couldn't hold it, Kat. I was shaking so much, water was jumping out of the glass. So I'm a grief counsellor, and I've done trauma and suicide. And I knew the physiology of that. But to actually have it happen is like you're your whole lifeline's cut off and you're in this vacuum of pain. It's like you've imploded. There's been a nuclear explosion on the inside and only your skin's holding it in. It feels that horrendous. So my body shut down and my language was impaired and I couldn't make a coherent sentence for about 3 weeks. But I got the first sign the morning after. They used to call me the crazy bird lady because I was always feeding birds and I had a garden full of birds and cats and hedgehogs. I think they followed him around more than me. And so I opened the curtains, even though for 3 weeks, I just sat in a chair downstairs. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, but the curtains were closed. So I went through the motions up to the bedroom. And there's this beautiful heron on the house opposite. Now, I live in suburbia and there are no trees for the heron to nest in. And it stared at me and I thought, that's Ant. And then it flew towards me in the bedroom and went over the roof. And I think it was telling me, I'm okay, Mum. I'm free. I'm flying high. And so I always get buzzards and birds of prey and, all sorts of... I've got 30 finches in my little cherry tree one morning. I mean, it's only a tiny tree, but 30 finches all chittering away in it. And I thought, yeah, that was kind of near his first anniversary. So I get so many fabulous signs from him. We did vigils at 10 to 5 every night on the first week. And I put a row of tea lights across the fireplace and I made an A in tea lights on the hearth. And Lindsay and I were reading poetry and talking about him and his photographs. And we played one of his songs and the candles started to dance, like an uncle at a disco or something. And they were all, I took a little video, it was fabulous. And the A, when I came down the next morning, had changed to an arrow that was pointing towards a beautiful photograph of Lindsay and Harry. So I think he was telling me, don't worry, Mum, I've got these two, And Kat, suicide, there was a lot of stigma. It's still in the Victorian days. And although I have supported parents whose children have died by suicide, I hadn't experienced the stigma firsthand. Now, I've got a lot of experience through my headship and through education leadership of death and dying and managing and talking. Death is still the elephant in the room, isn't it, in the Western civilization? People still hold it at a distance. And that's a psychological innocence because they're not quite sure exactly what to say or do. And they probably haven't worked through their own fears, which is what happens. People bring their own fears. And so if death is the elephant in the room, suicide is a herd of elephants. And so it's strange because when somebody dies, I know when my brother died in the road traffic accident, we had a wealth of visitors and not one of them asked about his injuries. And yet my visitors, not the close family and friends, but what gave their opinion about suicide. You can imagine the darkest place I was in losing a son. And I am just a mum grieving her son. I'm no different than any other mum whose child has died by whatever cause. I'm still the same mum grieving. But I found myself having to make people comfortable. And that took the tiny little bit of reserve that I had.
Talk about the subject matter. They didn't want this kind of stigma. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the stigma. So it's this feeling of somebody is exited that didn't need to exit, and they find it hard to accept that somebody has taken control of a situation and taken themselves over outside of a natural order. Is that the kind of stigma, Annie? Is that what you experienced?
It was probably a little bit of that. I mean, people don't understand mental health. It's getting better, isn't it? So understanding the pain and the mental torture of reaching that point when all you're doing is searching for love, you just want to find love and the ease and the peace of who we truly are. And if you haven't experienced difficult times in your life, or if you're and there's no judgment here, Kat, I'm just sharing knowledge. If you are the type of person that doesn't talk about difficult, intense emotions, then when that opportunity arises, and I'm talking about some professional people as well as, neighbours and friends, if you can't manage intense emotions and you don't know how to, then the only thing you do is push them away, and you push them away by judging or blaming and we all do that at some point in our lives, when something awkward happens.
So for the person who has experienced a transition by suicide of a loved one, they then have to respond emotionally, and they might feel judged themselves, they might feel shame, they might feel guilt, the would-haves, the should-haves, the could-haves all start to come into play. And what happens, I find, in some situations is that this cycle becomes perpetually going round in circles in a way, traumatizing the person living who's trying to cope with the trauma of the loss and the grief of the loss. And so it doesn't quite create complex grief straight away, but it certainly complicates grief and makes it harder for grief to surface in some way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, some people were really good. They just turned up, and all you need in grief, Kat, as you know, because you're a shining light mum too, all you need in grief is a hug, somebody to sit with you, to make you a cup of tea, to encourage you to eat a tiny piece of toast, or
to make some food for you, or bring something around just to help you get through the day. You talked about numbness, Annie. That is very common, isn't it? A lot of people find that an alien emotion at the beginning as well. But I remember when I talked to Mark Island about his situation when his son passed in an incident, he talked about 3 weeks of just laying there in numbness, actually just needing time to process.
yeah,
And not needing to speak. So actually, what people can do in holding space for you at the beginning is actually just be present, but don't expect anything in return. Don't put any pressure on the individual. Just let them be and process, but be there in your presence in different ways. And that can be sharing compassion through your eyes. It could be sending love at somebody. Some people might not actually be able to take the hug. Some people need the hug. Other people resist the hug because that's a pain as well, because it's accepting a love, after the love of their life has passed. They find it difficult. So sometimes you just have to beam that hug at them through your eyes or your presence or your being.
yes, I agree. I think, Kat, the one thing that I did do, especially with Lindsay, because Lindsay and Aunt were really close as brother and sister. And I would ask Lindsay, what do you need right now? So she didn't have to think about, what could I do to help her? Because you haven't got the capacity to think that deeply. But what do you need right now? I'm cold, Mum. I need a blanket, soft. And the smell, I've got some jasmine, and I love the smell of jasmine. And a friend came at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, knowing that I would be on my own because, the gap that Anthony left. And I was really I wanted to make sure Lindsay knew I was okay on my own. She has her own son, Harry, and stepdaughter, Caitlin, and they needed her. They were grieving for Aunt. But this friend turned up with a tiny, not over-facing box, a Tupperware box of this really beautiful yet very bland soup, which was amazing. I could swallow it because it was buttery and it wasn't spicy or anything, which you can't take. And she had this carry bag full of incense, because in my spiritual capacity as a shaman and as somebody who is really connected to spirit, I always have incense and candles. And for some unknown reason, I've got my little bottle of Florida water, which we use to honour, to clear the space. And I wanted to use it in Aunt's bedroom, around the house, around these little altars I'd laid up. And she'd been to see me in the week, and I'd said, for the first time in my life, I've run out of incense. So she brought me a carrier bag full of incense. And I'm only at the end of it now, 3 years on. And it's like you said, Kat, it's the hugs with your eyes. I used to put Aunt's zippy up hoodie on if anybody gave me a hug, so Aunt and I could have the hug. And I used to say to her, feel that, sweetheart. I know you've left the physical plane, and I'm really sure it was a last minute decision, so here's a hug. We both get this.
A lot of people find it very comforting to wear clothing belonging to their loved one and to feel that energy and the smell of them around them as well. Aromatherapy, very important actually. I studied aromatherapy when I started to do grief, sit with people who are experiencing grief. Don't just read for them. I would run support groups and just sit with people, listen to them and hold space for them, just like you're saying. And one thing that I came across that was very useful was a piece of research in America about how aromatherapy oils and oils in general, smell is one of the most prominent senses when we're first born. It's the way that we find the milk in the mother, and it's, it nourishes us and it comforts us in the early stages. And in the early stages, it's more profound than sight and hearing, which take over eventually. But that primordial sense of smell is survival based. And so when you get a beautiful scent like a lavender or a jasmine, or, and different people have different familiarities or different likes and tastes, you've got to go with what works for you. And that might be different to what works for Annie or what works for Kat. But you find the scent that awakens your senses, and it can be, wild orange is a good one, citrus fruits in general tend to be things that uplift us. They give us that little bit of brightness. And in these grieving moments, they can be very useful at shifting the colour or the tone or the energy of how you feel. And lavender in particular, if you like lavender, some people don't, rubbed into the base of your feet or around you in terms of smell, can be extremely healing and comforting, can help with the imbalance of hormones in the body and things like that as well. So it can serve many purposes. And I think, even running a hot bath, putting some Epsom salts in, a few drops of aromatherapy oil, all these little sort of self-love and self-care things that seem very basic and ordinary can be very comforting and hold space for someone in these very delicate, challenging times. Nature, being amongst trees or sitting outside, even if you're not really present, you're in a bit of a blur in those early stages, and you just want to be, but you need to be safe. And you might not feel like eating when you normally eat. So just nibbling or grazing and having, somebody brought round seeds or nuts or kind of dried fruits, or, providing people obviously are not allergic to nuts, etc. Just things that people can graze on are really useful, because sometimes you can't even face up to a full meal. A full meal just is a plate that you just want to stare at. It's not. And so just having things that can sustain us, like a bottle of water, just that you're going to sip on, you're not necessarily going to drink the way that you normally did. Everything changes in this moment, doesn't it, Annie? Everything.
I know, like you said about Mark, for 3 weeks, I didn't know, I didn't have any sensory input really. It was quite traumatic. I couldn't bear any sound. With sound, I jumped a foot off the chair and took me ages to come around to sound again. But yeah, I kind of gradually, what I did was I stepped out just one step into the front of the house, because with a death, you pull everything in. With a traumatic death and a death, any kind of death, you pull everything in and you curl up in that fetal position, even if you look like you're okay. It's what you're doing on the inside. And so just to step outside the front door was huge for me in the beginning. And then to gradually, a friend encouraged me to do the front garden in time for Anthony's funeral, because he would come home for one last time. And it was important to me. And I'm kind of like, got a very small front garden, a very long side garden. And so we spent the time together. At first, she did the side, which was, next to the public path, and then enticed me over. And I'm not a person who is easily scared, but I recognised and I allowed myself, Kat, I think that's really important. I allowed myself to unfold from this tight, curled space I was in of this grief. I allowed myself to come out and sense if I was okay. And if not, to go back again, not as tightly. And then Harry was really good. He'd just gone to sixth form. And he used to ring me up and say, "We finished early today." He calls me Ma, for grandma. "Finished early today, Ma. Could you come and collect me?" And it was a car park not too far away. And I didn't get out of the car. So that was my first kind of like taking the grief for a walk. And he came to me in the car park. And he just got in the first time. The second time, a week later, he said to me, "I'm just going into the supermarket, Mark, to get some hot lunch bits and pieces. Would you like to come with me?" And so I did. And I remember the tears, when you see certain items that you bought. I'm a vegetarian, Ants was a meat eater. and he drank Stella. And there was a display of Stella, so that set me off. And then there was lamb, and he loved lamb. And Harry just walked gently ahead of me and just turned around and nodded. And he was only 17, you know. And I think I only bought a bottle of sparkling water because I didn't know what to buy. And when we got to the checkout, he gently took the basket off me, put it through the till, paid for it with his student card, and then said, "Come on, Ma, let's go and get some lunch." He didn't say, "You haven't bought anything to eat," or, you know, he just accepted. And I think that's the most comforting thing, to accept yourself, to allow yourself to be where you are. But not to live there, Kat. There's a point, you know, where if you are still stuck in that feedback loop of grief, you know, where you've got the wound, the brain looks for everything else that's traumatic that's happened in your life, and it numbs you down, and you create a story around it, your grief story or your upset story, if it's an upset and somebody said something. Really attached to this.
That's really interesting, because there's two things I noticed. First, I noticed that spirit were making me rock. And I was just going to say, in reference to, you know, that numbness that we were talking about, is that sometimes you do need to go back to primitive feelings, and it might be rocking in a chair or sitting in that fetal position.
Yeah.
And just allowing you to feel the rhythm of your body or movement, no matter how involuntary. I know in India, they actually scream around or yell around the open pit of a funeral mire. So we're allowed to go back to these primitive spaces. I noticed that that's what spirit were trying to make me say when they were making me rock. And I also saw them put this comforting blanket around me, as if I just wanted that tactility and just wanted to be in that space. But you touched on something really interesting there, where after the initial sort of moment and this numbness, once this numbness passes, then we're looking for answers and we're looking for responses, and we go searching, don't we? And we start this repetitive mind spin that we're talking about. And at that point, you may have to go through that cycle a couple of times, but we have to make a choice. We can either suffer and allow ourselves to continue to suffer in that pain, or we can be brave, and we have to then look at the other decisions and opportunities. How do you take somebody, Annie, as the counsellor and the experienced mum, from that space of perpetual cycle into the plateau of making different choices? How have you worked that through in the work that you do?
First of all, it's unique to everybody. But usually if I'm working with a family, then I've already found out from teachers or people that know the family how they are and what their choices are before the trauma. And I would take a box of rugs and some gentle colours, not bright colours, and a little jar. And I would say to the children, I can see one particular family now in a school, choose your rug and have it with you or wrap it around you. And one child just had it and stroked it, because I used to choose like the velvety different textures, not the sharp, not the woolly textures.
When you say rug, you mean almost like a shawl or a blanket?
But yeah, you know, the ones you can buy in the garden centres, the little ones that you can just wrap around you. Or fabric. I used to take pieces of fabric, you know, if the mum just wanted to because we miss that. There's a physical longing of the person that's moved on, that's passed. And so I would have them talking, usually with a story, a grief story, a child's story. And I've got a fabulous book. I don't think it's... Oh, it is. It's called After the Fall. It's Humpty Dumpty, but it's a different story. And it talks about the limitations, the things we do, the things we stop ourselves doing. So that brings up an opportunity and I always do it with the children, because children are quite open and talkative. It's the mum that was, so she had the opportunity to listen to the children talking. And then we had a jar, and I said, all we're going to do before we meet tomorrow is choose one thing you'd really love to do and pop it in the jar. We're all going to do that. It's your family jar. And then bring it back tomorrow, and it's a plastic jar, so it's safe for children to take. Bring it back tomorrow, and tomorrow we're going to put some more things in you'd like to do. And you can get them out and read them and talk about them before you go to sleep. You can have 5 more minutes before you go to sleep talking to your mum about it. And then that's an opportunity for that family at the weekend to pick out one of the things. And, you know, I would take examples of what might go in it, and I would have a jar to show them. And then there's the memory box. This is so beautiful. And it's strange because I haven't done a memory box for Aunt. I think the whole house is a memory box. But I did one for Dad when Dad passed in COVID time. He didn't have COVID. And so in my Dad box, there's his peak cap from his gardening. There's his trowel because he loved building. And there's the Ancient Mariner book because he used to quote part of that poem the whole time in his dad voice. And so I've done those grief boxes with children in school. And the other thing you can do, which is fabulous, you get a set of coloured chalks and some salt, and you pour the salt out on the table and you rub chalk into the salt, and it shows the layers different. And you build up a tiny little jar of different layers, and you say, you're in the pink place now. Maybe you'll be in the green place next week, or maybe you'll go back to the pink place. So allowing for them to talk about emotions and to move to and from those emotions, and then to have that more serious chat with the mum when the children have gone back to class.
The chalk, in Annie, as they move the chalk into the salt, the colour of the chalk goes into the salt. Is that what happens? And then you just push it into the
chalk? So you might use the pink, a little bit of salt and some pink chalk and then you put the pink salt in the jar. Then you get some fresh salt and another colour. And so you get like this little beautiful rainbow jar of layers. Yeah.
That sounds really cool.
I got that from Winston's Wish. Winston's Wish is a stunning grief site, from parents who died by suicide. That was the first place I went to 20, 30 years ago, and they have some amazing ideas.
Well, that's lovely for people to know that they can reference that. And then with the parents, obviously grief is different at different ages, Annie. How do you manage it with the parents? How is it different?
There's one thing that I do teach, and it's a very simple continuum. And this is where we are in grief, in this fear place, in this very conditional, limiting place. That's where the guilt is. That's where the grief is. Although grief is also with love, as you know. I think I read something that you put on Facebook. It's the resistance to suffering. It's the resistance, that I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should have been able to save him. I had all of that. And I had a really good friend who was the dean of a psychology school in a university in America, who spent every day with me because I was lost. I couldn't imagine the awfulness of it. And sort of, you've got to be sensitive about people's thinking about the afterlife, Kat, as well, as you probably know. And so if I've got a family who believes in different things about the afterlife, then I'll read up about it if I don't know. And I'll encourage them to talk about the funeral and the celebration of life and what they believe.
So you try to keep it in the context of their system and their ideas of understanding. That's really important, isn't it? Because the way that we see the world and we perceive it is different. And in this heightened sensitivity, this period of incongruences, like you said, or sounds feel louder, noise carries in a way that it just didn't before, and comments that are made by people, no matter how innocent they are perceived extremely differently when you're in a distressed state or you feel uncomfortable. And this process, keeping that congruence, or them to be able to, they haven't got the strength to take on new concepts or ideas of the world. They need to be able to operate in the system that they understand and that framework first. And I think you've hit something on a nail that's really important to say, is that even though we are both very spiritual people and very open, having done support work in different guises together and separately, we meet a lot of people from all different cultures, all different religious backgrounds. Some have no religious background at all, and we never place our own ideology or perceptions upon people. We may later down the line discuss our different perceptions and points of view very openly and share from that and take from that what we will that comforts us or helps us on our journey. But it's a gentle sort of discussion. It's never an influence or a direct instruction or demand. I think that's really important. That, I often say in my work, Annie, that I can't be religious. I can't be, not because I don't like faiths, not because I haven't learnt from them. Spirit will direct me to whatever faith or culture I need to understand. A bit like what you're saying about, well, I've got a parent and I need to understand their framework, so I'm going to read up on about it. Spirit will encourage me to do the same. And on my office in front of me, which you can't see, is a shrine to all cultures and all religions.
And me too.
And that's something that's very important to me, because I might stare at one of those items when I have somebody in front of me, because Spirit wants me to be aware that the person sat in front of me is from that faith or has that ideology. And I will utilise those in the same way that you do in order to get through the healing perspectives or draw on the opportunities to comfort somebody or to help somebody in that mindset in that way. And their faiths may differ to mine, and the fact that they've had the openness to sit in front of me is very, very important, because mediumship, there was a really interesting picture, and actually I really do think Devon was helping me today. Devon is a young man who he's the son of two of our dear friends, Jeff and Lynn, and it was his birthday while I was away. And I know they're coming on because it was his way of getting them involved on the podcast, but he sent me a sign the other day, which his sign is the crow, and a few days later he sends me this image of a crow in amongst ants, just bathing in ants. And I thought, what is this about? It looks so odd, it looks like such an incongruence. And I was like, that's a really odd thing to send me. But when I read it up, it was actually a David Attenborough quote, and it's about how when a crow is ill and needs antiseptic, the natural way is to allow ants to actually cover its body, and it heals because of the antiseptic that they have that's natural. So some of these things that look like they don't go together in nature. And I feel that mediumship's a little bit the same, Annie, and this spiritual guys, is that to a lot of people it's an incongruence. It doesn't look right. It's woo-woo, or it's weird, or it's strange. But actually, it's part of nature. It's our nature. And at the innate state of being, it's there for a healing purpose, is my belief. I believe that it is an opportunity that can transform people. I've had people that have, I remember one lady in particular who said to me she'd gone the traditional route for 10 years and had tried everything. And she came for one reading, head stiff, because her religion was had the absolute opposite belief system, that it was a negative thing. And I remember the joy that I felt in my heart when she said, it's the first night that I've slept through the night in 10 years. It is the first night I haven't had a panic attack. It's the first night I felt at peace knowing that he's okay. And the evidence that you gave tells me it could only be him. And so all I say is that I don't want to influence anybody to believe what I believe in. But if you are in a space of suffering and trauma, and something gives you a light or allows you to sleep through the night, or it stops a panic attack, or it does something to give you peace, done with the right experienced hand from people that understand grief like we do, it can be transformative. And I know that is true also of your shamanic work and other things, which people here listening may not understand. What I love about you is you've gone and done the traditional work first. So you understand counselling, you understand the traditional routes and all the things that will help mother, child, parent, grandparent, neighbour, you know the different relationships. But then something else opens up in you, and you may have had spiritual thoughts and ideas before Anthony passed, but you certainly went on the search to find out where he was after. Tell us all a little bit about that and how these alternative ideas, let's call them alternative for the moment as an easy way in, can help somebody or help heal you. And again, we're not saying we're influencing or asking people to believe what we believe in or go that direction. We're not. We're just putting it on a plate as a tool for healing, if you're open to it.
Yeah. Mirabai Starr said, grief is a calling into the wilderness of transformation. And I thought that was a stunning quote, because grief cracks your heart wide open. And the way you've talked about connecting through your mediumship is about a presence. And it's what I do in my coaching and in my energetic healing work. I get present with the person. I get present with my grief, even if it hurts at the time. And if it's too hurtful, I'll get somebody to be present with me. That's really important. But it's a deeply personal time of loss. And I grew up in a religious household. With my mum was from Southern Ireland and we were Catholics, which I pushed away. But I loved the ceremony. I was an 8-year-old in this blue cape, kneeling on a stone floor in church with the presence of the host, which Catholics believe is the body of Jesus, which I always found was a bit weird when I was growing up, but I understand it more now. And I'm there honouring my religion. And so I tried to seek something else other than that religious faith that, this teenager, Annie, didn't want to know. I didn't want to go to confession. I didn't want to go to Mass every day. If you didn't go to Mass, I remember standing up on a chair as a 6-year-old, and the priest would ask, have you been to Mass? Have you been to Holy Communion? Have you been to confession? And can you say the Our Father? Well, I was terrified and I couldn't. So I got the cane. So to this day, I can't say the Our Father. And those are only kind of the dogma of the time. I'm talking 60s. That's how old I am. And so I know through reading about the new Pope, maybe it will change, maybe it won't, but it's still very, very masculine. It's patriarchal faith. And as a woman, the divine feminine, Mother Earth is so important to me. Used to have a grandma that sat on the end of my bed, and she sat, and I used to have conversations with her. And she, when I went to a cemetery with my other grandma, there she was, and she had my name. My baptismal name is Anne Howie, and there was my name on the gravestone. And I said to my grandma, my nana, I'm not dead. Why am I? Why is that there? And she showed me when we got back home this photograph of my great-great-grandma in the same outfit on the end of the bed. And I think that's what we look for when we're looking for this. We all know, because we're made of the same energy, that there is something greater turning this earth, making the sun appear, the natural beauty of nature. That's who we truly are underneath. And that's where I will take someone back to if they've lost their way and they're focusing too much on that story that they're, if it's a grief story or a hurt story or a lost story, whatever the story is. And so the shamanic part was me opening up beyond the 5 physical senses and working with energy, because I already understood spirit from the grandma that appeared on the end of my bed, from other spirits that appeared to me when I was little. So I knew there's more to this life. And don't get me wrong, Kat, some of my family would be switching off by now. Some close family would be rolling their eyes, oh, she's on a spiritual soapbox. But I am, and it's because I believe in it. So the shamanic work, there's one tiny piece that I could really, I did it for helping parents heal.
Shamanic work is, Annie, first of all, let's backtrack.
Well, it's working out the energetic. So I've been around the medicine wheel. So I've studied with Alberto Violdo and the Four Winds, Peruvian shamanism. I've also studied Celtic shamanism. My mum used to read tea leaves, the tea leaves with a glass of sherry in the dining room with all my dad's boss's wives.
Shamanic work as learning how to read energy. Is that how you...
How to go, jump time, how to go forward and bring things back from the future, how to go back and heal the ancestors, because time's made up anyway. Time is something that...
It's looking at energy free of time and space. It's been able to be unlimited in some way. I'm just fascinated because I
the thing is, when we have this luminous body as well as this physical body, and so if we have, say,
field, which we know is there and exists.
We've got the auras and we've got this connection, this luminous field. And so if we have anything that's stuck, so if you imagine when I was divorced and I had this stuck story in my field and I wanted to move on from that, which is why I was searching for this energetic work, then we have what we call is an illumination process. And it's working through the chakras really, really simply. But it's because you've been around the medicine wheel and you understand.
And chakras, for people that don't know, are energy wheels of energy in the body.
They're little funnels that connect us, yeah. There's 8 of them. Well, there's more than 8, actually. There's 12. And they're all through our body. And, it's so simple to learn about that your root chakra to your root chakra is down kind of between your legs. And then there's chakras and they all inform, that's why they're there, they inform who we are as a person. And so what one chakra gets stuck, we bring everything, we bring all the worry and the story to that chakra, clear it out, sometimes with a rattle, sometimes with a drum, sometimes just by seeing it or seeing that energy.
It's about the movement of energy through the body.
Yeah, it is.
That connects to the past and the future. It's free of space and time, but it's about allowing this energy to move, because we're all electronic beings. We've all got an electrical charge. Mother Earth has a negative charge, which actually in this instance isn't negative. It's a positive. Everything that is grounded in our electronic world has an earth wire.
The quantum field, Kat. The quantum field that scientists discovered. There's no time there. There's only the present, the now. That's where we live as shaman, in the now.
Ground ourselves and let the energy that we have naturally through our body move in a way that gives us ease and comfort and allows these. And you're right, these thoughts of repressed energy, they cause like blocks or dis-ease in the body, discomfort, and they can cause physical and emotional and mental situations that then can become more challenging or need to be dealt with in a different way.
And there are beautiful meditations that take you. Shaman believe in the underworld, which is just a metaphor for the stuck places. And then this world that we live on, which is the literal world, the emotional world, where all the stuff comes at us. And then there's the upper world where our ancestors and our celestial parents are. And there's a beautiful, stunning meditation that I did, that when you get to the upper world, you can meet your child or your family, if you've got more than your child up there, and sit with them for a while. Because I think that's, the longing for that physical presence for your child. That was something that, after about 3 or 4 months, I really struggled with. And I remember curling up on the floor and just really calling out, like you were saying earlier, the primitive, that really keening sound was coming from me, and just saying, help, I'm consumed by grief. And the next morning, it was New Year's Eve, and I'd gone through the first of Lindsay's birthday, Caitlin's birthday, Christmas. I crawled through it. And it was New Year's Eve, and I said, I just want to feel my son. And I woke up to Anthony's voice on New Year's morning that said, go and put the radio on, Mum. And it's a little radio that he bought for me a few months before he passed. It's a little digital thing. And I came downstairs and I opened the lounge door. Kat, it was like a cathedral. The sacred presence of Aunt hit me like a wave. It was stunning. And every morning I get that. I open my lounge door and I get that presence. And there's also everybody else in the background. It's like this giant spiritual hug. It's beautiful. And again, he said to me, put the radio on, Mum. And it was Sarah Lackland's Angel, which Anthony, we had that for him walking in behind his coffin on his celebration of life. And so I was streaming tears by then.
The Angels by Sarah.
And the story was about the Pieta, which is a statue in Italy. I think it's Italy. Might be Venice. I'll have to look that up, Kat. You might have to edit that bit. It's a statue of Mary when Jesus is taken down from the cross. It's the grieving mother and the dead son. And it's the statue my mum had in her lounge because she missed my brother so much. And so I know now that this story and Anthony, and it's everybody's there. Mum's there, aunt's there, and I called out.
Got repetition of the loss of a son in the family. So your mum also lost a son.
Yeah, my sister's first child was stillborn as well, at the last hour. But I've cleared that ancestral line through my energetic work. And it's not a specific thing you do, like there are some things in cognitive behavior therapy, but I find I get too caught up in my head when I'm doing anything like that, because I am a spiritual person. But there may be a client who needs that to anchor them.
Yeah.
And I only do spiritual stuff in my coaching if I'm nudged by spirit, and then I will ask the client if.
I think we might have to have you back and talk about ancestral theory and stuff, because I've looked at it from the Buddhist point of view. I've done it in terms of sound and chant and looked at ceremony and mandalas and things like that. And I've also done it through hypnosis. And I think it is a subject matter people would love to hear about. And I know you've got a completely different experience and perception to me. I've got some very interesting organic stories of what happened to me during my awakening when spirit took some things out of my aura, and I'd love to sort of share those stories. But I think we'll do it in a separate episode, Annie, because I think it has its own focus. But I think what a beautiful storyline in terms of giving people some nuggets about the early stages of grief and how to explore. How do people get hold of you, Annie, if they wanted to get spiritual counselling? Or
I got a website, www.annipoole.com, and it's ANNI for Annie, POOLE for pool. And I've got a book, Simply Being You, which is just Anni Siliverdale.
And that's on Amazon, isn't it?
That's on Amazon, yeah. And I've got a course coming up that's called Simply Being You, which is about living consciously, finding awareness.
People can also find you on my Facebook site and Andy's Facebook, which is Cat B Making Connections Possible. So if you want to come join the group, we do readings and we discuss.
And I would give 70% off for anybody listening to the podcast, Cat.
Oh, wow.
If they just put Cat B podcast in any communication they do to me, then they can have the course. And if anybody needs a scholarship, then it will be free.
Amazing. Oh, Annie, it's so lovely. So lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you do. So it's been an honour.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.